The folder landed beside my sister's wedding cake while 200 guests were still holding champagne. "Sign it," my father said. 30% of your company. Chloe deserves her share." I stared at the words printed beneath the name of the company I had spent 11 years building. Historic co-founder contribution. Chloe had never worked a single day at Reform Fiber. "I'm not signing this." My mother's hand struck my face before I finished the sentence. The ballroom went silent. For 37 years, that silence would have made me apologize. Instead, I closed the folder, walked out, and called the one person whose name they had used to justify everything. Grandpa answered on the second ring, and when I told him what they had done, he said only 4 words. "Grace, don't leave yet." 20 minutes earlier, my mother had been rearranging us for photographs. That should have warned me. Patricia Holloway believed there was a correct position for every person in a room, every fork on a table, every flower in a centerpiece, and every child in her family. "Ben, straighten your jacket." My younger brother obeyed. "Neil, stand beside me." Dad moved half a step. "Grace, not there. You're blocking Chloe." I looked over my shoulder. My sister was already standing in the center of the bridal party in a white satin gown that probably cost more than my first laboratory centrifuge. I moved. Of course I moved. At 37, I was the founder and CEO of a company valued at roughly $50 million after our last strategic investment round. I employed engineers, chemists, production managers, operators, salespeople, and one terrifyingly efficient executive assistant who could tell venture capitalists they were wrong without raising her voice. And somehow, my mother could still move me 3 feet to the left with one sentence. "Perfect," she said. The photographer lifted his camera. Chloe smiled immediately. She had always been good at that. When we were kids, I did the research for school projects. Chloe volunteered to present them. I wrote the note cards. She made the teachers laugh. I built the model volcano. She stood beside it when the picture went in the school newsletter. Mom used to say the same thing every time. "Grace does the complicated part. Chloe makes people care." For years, I had convinced myself that was a compliment. The camera flashed. "Another one," Mom said. My phone vibrated inside my clutch. I ignored it. It vibrated again. Mom's eyes moved toward my hand. "Please tell me you're not working during your sister's wedding. It might be the plant." "It's always the plant." I felt my shoulders tighten. There were dozens of answers I could have given. That our new forming line had been running temperature instability tests all week. That an equipment alarm did not care whether my sister was cutting a wedding cake. That I had already given Reform's operations director authority to handle almost anything that came up tonight. Instead, I smiled. "It can wait." Mom relaxed instantly. That was another thing I had learned young. Peace returned fastest when I surrendered before anyone had to ask twice. The photographer took another picture. Then one of Chloe's new in-laws approached us, carrying champagne. Mom transformed. Her shoulders loosened. Her smile warmed. Her voice rose half an octave. "This is our oldest daughter, Grace." The woman smiled at me. "Of course. Reform Fiber." I nodded. Before I could answer, Mom touched Chloe's arm. "And Chloe has been part of Grace's journey from the very beginning." My eyes shifted toward her. It was a strange sentence. Not completely strange. Mom had spent years turning individual accomplishments into family stories. When I received a research grant, it became something we had all sacrificed for. When Reform hired its 100th employee, Mom told neighbors our family had always been entrepreneurial. When I closed the investment round that pushed the company's valuation close to $50 million, Dad joked that he should have charged me rent for all those childhood years I spent inventing things in the basement. So, I let the sentence pass. I had become very good at letting sentences pass. Chloe's new mother-in-law smiled. "What an incredible family." Mom squeezed Chloe's arm. "We're very close." The old reflex rose inside me before I could stop it. I smiled for her. The folder appeared after the speeches. I had just returned my champagne glass to a passing server when Dad touched my elbow. "Come over here for a second." He was holding a cream-colored folder. Thick paper. Embossed edge. The kind of thing my parents believed made any conversation respectable. What is it? Something we should have handled weeks ago. That sentence made me hesitate. Dad gestured toward a small cocktail table beside the wedding cake. Mom was already there. So was Chloe. Her veil had been removed, but she still wore the jeweled comb. Mom had insisted belonged in the family wedding photographs. I walked over. What's going on? Mom gave me the smile she used when she had already decided I was being difficult and wanted witnesses to see how patient she was being. Nothing dramatic. Behind her, at least 30 people were close enough to hear us. I looked at Dad again. He placed the folder in front of me. Read the first page. I opened it. The Reform Fiber name was at the top. My stomach tightened before I had read another word. It was a draft equity transfer agreement. Not a final executed corporate document. Not something that could magically hand over a third of my company in the middle of a wedding reception. But whoever had prepared it knew enough to make the intention unmistakable. I was being asked to transfer roughly 30% of my outstanding founder shares to Chloe and agree to support her nomination to a future board seat. I read the first paragraph twice. Then I reached the phrase that made the music behind me disappear. Formal recognition of Chloe Holloway's historic co-founder contribution to Reform Fiber. I looked up. Historic co-founder contribution? Chloe crossed her arms. Dad answered for her. You know what it means. No, I know what the words mean. I'm asking what they're doing in this document. Mom exhaled softly. Grace. That one word had been used to dismiss questions since I was old enough to ask them. I kept reading. This says Chloe contributed to the company from its earliest development. She did, Mom said. My eyes went back to her. How? She stared at me as though I were deliberately humiliating my sister. Emotionally. Socially. She was there. She was in college in Arizona during Reform's first 2 years. Chloe's expression hardened. You don't have to make me sound useless. I didn't say you were useless. You're acting like I did nothing. I closed the folder. Chloe, you weren't a co-founder. Dad stepped closer. This isn't a deposition, Grace. I'm aware. It's Chloe's wedding. Exactly. He tapped the folder. Which is why you're going to stop turning this into another technical argument and do something generous for your sister. I stared at him. 30% of my company? The company is worth $50 million. That does not mean I have $50 million sitting in a checking account. His mouth tightened. You know what I mean. Yes, I do. And that was the problem. Mom placed 2 fingers against the folder. You already have more than enough. There it was. Not ownership. Abundance. As though success transformed property into something everyone else had a moral claim to. Chloe looked down at the table. I studied her face, trying to understand how much of this she knew. How long have you had this? Dad said. Long enough. Who drafted it? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Everything has to be difficult with you. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked back at the papers. A decade earlier, that sentence would have ended the discussion. Grace is difficult. Grace overthinks. Grace counts everything. Grace asks too many questions. Grace makes simple things complicated. At work, people paid me very well to make complicated things precise. At home, the same habit was treated like a character defect. Dad pointed at the signature line. Sign it. I looked around us. More people were paying attention now. Mom noticed too. Of course she did. Her voice became softer. Please don't embarrass Chloe. Something inside me went very still. I'm not signing this. Dad's face changed. Don't be selfish. I looked at Chloe. She didn't tell him to stop. Mom's jaw tightened. You've spent your entire life needing everything to belong to you. I almost asked whether she could hear herself. Instead, I put the folder down. I built Reform, and Chloe stood beside you. No, she didn't. Chloe flinched. Mom stepped forward. Do you have any idea what it has been like for your sister to live in your shadow? The sentence hurt more than it should have. Maybe because it was so familiar. When I got into graduate school, Chloe needed reassurance. When I won a fellowship, Chloe needed reassurance. When I opened my first production facility, I was asked not to talk too much about it at Christmas because Chloe was having a difficult year. My victories always came with instructions on how to make them smaller. Dad slid the folder toward me again. Your grandfather always said what started in his garage should stay in the family. I stared at him. Grandpa's garage. That was different. That was specific. And Dad knew it. The earliest material trials that eventually became reform had been done in Grandpa Samuel's detached garage because I couldn't afford proper workspace. He had let me use an old workbench, a utility sink, and every extension cord he owned. He had never asked for equity. He had never even accepted rent. Dad tapped the paper. You know he would want this. I looked at the signature line, then at my father, then at my mother. No. Dad's voice rose. Grace. I said no. Mom stepped closer. Do not do this today. I'm not the one who brought corporate paperwork to Chloe's wedding. Her hand moved before I understood what she was doing. The impact was quick. My face turned slightly. Someone gasped. The wedding music kept playing. For half a second I wasn't 37 years old. I was 17 again, hearing Mom tell me not to ruin dinner because Chloe had already had a difficult day. My mouth opened. The apology was right there. Automatics. Ready. Then I looked down at the folder and closed my mouth. I picked it up. Mom whispered. Where are you going? Outside. Grace, come back here. I kept walking. No speech. No threat. No promise that they would regret it. I simply left them standing beside the cake. The corridor outside the ballroom was cold and too bright. My cheek burned. I leaned against the wall and breathed slowly until my hands stopped shaking enough to use my phone. Grandpa answered on the second ring. Hey, kiddo. Grandpa, I need to ask you something. My voice sounded remarkably normal. Go ahead. Did you ever tell Mom and Dad Chloe should own part of Reform because I started it in your garage? Silence. Not confused silence. Angry silence. No. I closed my eyes. Did you ever say Reform should belong to the family? No. Dad says you did. Another pause. Where are you? At the ballroom. I'm downstairs. I straightened. What? Your mother told me to wait in the hotel lounge until after the family photographs. Said there wasn't enough room near the head table. Of course she had. Grandpa, you don't need to. Grace. His voice sharpened. Don't leave yet. The call ended. I stared at the screen. Less than 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Grandpa Samuel stepped out in the dark blue suit he wore to every wedding, funeral, retirement dinner, and Christmas Eve service. He walked with a cane now. Slowly. Not dramatically. But when we re-entered the ballroom together, Dad saw him immediately. So did Mom. The color drained from her face. Grandpa stopped beside the cocktail table. Dad spoke first. Samuel, this is a family matter. Grandpa looked at the folder in my hand. You used my name? Dad rubbed the back of his neck. I told Grace you always believed businesses like hers should stay in the family. I said families should support each other. Grandpa looked at me. I never said she owed anybody her company. Mom stepped in. No one said owed. I opened the folder and pointed to the paragraph. They want 30% transferred to Chloe. Grandpa read it slowly. Then he looked at my sister. Were you working with Grace when she started those material trials? Chloe swallowed. No. It was the first simple answer I had heard all night. Grandpa nodded. Then don't put my garage in a story where it doesn't belong. That was all. No dramatic disinheritance. No threat. No rich grandfather announcing he secretly owned the company. He simply took away the lie they had attached to his name. Dad looked furious. Mom looked frightened. And for the first time that evening, I wondered why. I was collecting my purse when Chloe found me in the corridor. You're really leaving? Yes. Her voice shook. You brought Grandpa in there and humiliated Mom and Dad. I asked Grandpa whether Dad was telling the truth. You knew what would happen. No, Chloe, I didn't. She stepped closer. Why are you pretending this is new? I frowned. What? The shares. My hand tightened around my purse. What about them? Mom said you'd already agreed in principle. I stared at her. I never agreed to give you equity. Her expression changed. Not guilt. Confusion. At least that was what it looked like from where I stood. She said you were worried doing it before the investment round would look like nepotism. I never said that. She said you wanted to wait until after my wedding. I never said that either. Chloe shook her head. So Mom invented an entire conversation? I don't know. You always do this. Do what? Make everyone else sound stupid because you understand the paperwork. That one landed exactly where she intended. My family had spent years teaching me that competence became cruelty the moment it made somebody else uncomfortable. I could feel myself preparing to explain, to soften, to tell Chloe I loved her, to tell her she wasn't stupid, to fix the look on her face. Then Ben's name flashed across my phone. Mom is crying. Dad is furious. Chloe's in the hallway. Can you please come back and calm everyone down? I read the message twice. There it was. My real job in the family. Not founder. Not scientist. Not daughter. Cleanup crew. I typed, I'm going home. The wedding has plenty of adults in it. Then I put my phone away. Chloe stared at me. You're just leaving? Yes. What am I supposed to do? The old Grace almost answered. Instead I said, You're 31, and walked away. At home, I took off my shoes, washed my face, and placed the cream folder on my kitchen table. My phone showed 27 unread family messages. I muted them. Then I opened my laptop. Not because I wanted revenge. Because something did not fit. Dad had said the paperwork was about generosity. Mom had said it was about Chloe living in my shadow. Chloe believed I had already promised her 30%. And the agreement itself described her as having a historic co-founder contribution. That phrase had come from somewhere. I scanned the packet. On the final page was an appendix I had missed at the reception. One line caught my attention. Founder history positioning to align with forthcoming media profile. I read it again. Media profile? An email notification appeared at the corner of my screen. The sender was a business magazine I knew. The subject line, Final Fact Check Reform Fiber, Founder Profile. My pulse slowed instead of quickening. That was what happened when I became afraid at work. I got quieter. I opened the email. The article draft loaded. The first sentence was enough. Sisters Grace and Chloe Holloway began experimenting with sustainable fiber composites in their grandfather's garage before transforming a family dream into reform fiber, now valued at nearly $50 million. I stopped breathing for a moment. Then I scrolled. Chloe Holloway, co-founder, not prospective partner, not brand advisor, not future executive, co-founder. She had never worked in my lab. Never created a material formulation. Never signed a supplier agreement. Never owned a share. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Founder History Source Check. Then I saved the wedding agreement, the article draft, the email. For the first time that night, I stopped wondering why my parents wanted me to give Chloe part of my company. A different question had taken its place. How long had they been telling people she already owned part of the story? Because the article didn't say Chloe was going to become my co-founder. It said she already was. The article stayed open on my screen until almost 2 in the morning. Every time I thought I had reached the worst sentence, another one appeared. Chloe had supposedly helped me shape the public mission of reform during its earliest development. She had stood beside me as the company grew from garage experiments into a national manufacturer. One paragraph described us as two halves of the same idea, me handling the science while she gave the company its human voice. The wording sounded polished, too polished, and disturbingly familiar. Grace does the complicated part. Chloe makes people care. I closed the article and opened it again, forcing myself to stop reading it as a daughter and start reading it the way I would read a failed material report. Claim. Source. Date. Evidence. I created a spreadsheet. The first column was the statement. The second was whether it was true. The third was what could verify it. The fourth was who appeared to have supplied it. By the time I stopped, the sky outside my kitchen windows had started turning gray. There were 43 unread messages on my phone. I did not open them. At 7:30, I showered, covered the faint redness on my cheek with makeup, and drove to reform. For once, I did not call anyone in the family on the way. Maya Singh was already in the conference room when I arrived. She had worked with me for nearly 4 years, first as our public relations consultant and later as director of communications. Maya had a talent I envied. She could look directly at a mess without becoming emotionally involved in proving who had created it. She studied my face when I walked in. "You look like you didn't sleep." I didn't. Wedding? Among other things. I connected my laptop to the screen. The magazine draft appeared. Maya read the first paragraph. Her eyebrows rose. "Chloe is not a co-founder." "No." "Has she ever been an employee?" "No." "Consultant?" "No." "Equity holder?" "No." Maya looked at me. "Then where did this come from?" "That's what we're going to find out." Way. The word almost made me uncomfortable. Not because I distrusted Maya. Because somewhere along the way, I had started assuming that if something threatened my work, I had to personally carry every piece of it. I opened the spreadsheet. I don't want a statement yet. I don't want anyone calling the magazine angry. I want the source history preserved. Maya nodded. Press kits, biographies, website revisions, all of it. Original files, not rewritten versions. What about email? Archive anything connected to founder history, Chloe, Patricia, or outside profiles. Don't delete duplicate drafts. Maya leaned back slightly. You think someone has been feeding this story for a while? I know the wedding paperwork referenced a forthcoming profile. I know this article already treats Chloe as a co-founder. I don't know anything beyond that yet. The distinction mattered. I had spent too many years listening to people in my family turn suspicions into facts whenever the facts were convenient. I wasn't going to become them just because I was angry. Maya shut her notebook. I'll preserve the communications trail. Thank you. She paused at the door. Grace? Yes? If you want me to ask what happened to your face, I will. If you don't, I won't. My hand moved toward my cheek before I stopped it. I don't. All right. Then she left. No interrogation. No dramatic promise to protect me. She simply respected the line I had drawn. By mid-morning, the first internal archive arrived. The earliest Reform Press materials said exactly what they were supposed to say. Founded by materials scientist Grace Holloway. No Chloe. No sisters. No family dream. I checked each version. The phrase appeared nowhere. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it narrowed the question. If the story had not come from Reform, someone had built it outside the company. My phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Denise. Your mother says you brought corporate attorneys into Chloe's wedding mess. This has gone too far. I stared at it. No attorney had contacted anyone. I hadn't even spoken to outside counsel. Another message arrived from a cousin. You could just share credit. You have more than enough. A third. Grandpa is 82. He shouldn't be dragged into this. I put the phone face down. There was a time when 3 messages like that would have cost me half a workday. I would have written careful explanations, adjusted every sentence so no one felt accused, then called Mom afterward to make sure she knew I wasn't trying to embarrass her. Instead, I reopened the archive. At 11:23, I found the first thing that did not fit. A conference biography for Chloe. It was dated 6 months earlier. I read the line twice. Chloe Holloway, co-founder of Reform Fiber, helped translate breakthrough materials science into a mission embraced by customers and communities. The file had not been created by our communications department. It was an attachment forwarded to one of our sales directors after he noticed Chloe's name on an event website. The original sender was Chloe. My hands went cold around the edge of the desk. So, she knew. Whatever story Mom had told her, whatever misunderstanding existed about future shares, Chloe had seen the word co-founder attached to her own name and had allowed it to stand. I saved the email. Then I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. That was all I gave myself. 3 seconds to want the simple answer. Chloe did it. Chloe wanted my company. Chloe had always wanted what I had. It would have been easier. Anger likes a clean target. Evidence rarely gives you one. At noon, I drove to Grandpa's house. His garage smelled exactly the same as it had 12 years earlier. Sawdust, cold concrete, old motor oil, and the faint mineral smell from the utility sink. He had cleared one side of the workbench before I arrived. Several cardboard boxes sat there. "I pulled what I could find," he said. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." He looked at me over his glasses. "They used my garage to tell a story. I'd like to know which story." That was as close to anger as Grandpa usually came. He opened the first box. Photographs. Most were ordinary. Birthday dinners. A summer barbecue. Ben asleep in a lawn chair. Chloe at 17 wearing sunglasses too large for her face. Then Grandpa handed me one of the older prints. There I was. 26. Hair tied back badly. Safety goggles on. Standing over a stainless steel tray filled with gray fiber pulp. On the back, Grandpa had written the date. Another photograph showed me holding a warped sheet of early composite material. Another caught me sitting on the garage floor surrounded by ruined samples. No Chloe. Not because anyone had intentionally excluded her. She simply hadn't been there. I photographed the backs and fronts with my phone. "These help establish context," I said. "But I already have lab records." "Good." He tapped one of the boxes. "Pictures remember less accurately than people think." I smiled despite myself. That sounds like something I would say. "You got it from somewhere." I opened the second box and found an old utility bill, hardware receipts, and a copy of the first month-to-month workspace agreement I had insisted on making him sign. Grandpa had laughed at me then. "You made me sign a lease for half my own garage. You told me real businesses keep records. I regret teaching you that when I was trying to give you free space." The smile disappeared from his face. He picked up a photograph. "Your mother called me about those business events, you know." I looked at him. "What events?" "Over the years." "What did she say?" He hesitated. Not because he was hiding something, because he was deciding how exact to be. "She said you didn't always want me coming. Said I might feel out of place around investors and people from the company." My fingers stopped on the lid of the box. "I never said that. I know that now." "Why didn't you ask me?" He looked embarrassed. "You were busy, and your mother said you didn't want to hurt my feelings." For several seconds, all I could hear was the garage refrigerator clicking on. Mom had not merely described me to people. She had spoken for me. I thought about all the times Grandpa had skipped award dinners or open houses and told me he was tired. I had believed him. Maybe sometimes he had been tired. Maybe sometimes Mom had built a bridge between two people and then quietly removed the center. "I need to be careful here," I said. Grandpa nodded. "I'm not telling you what it means." "Good. I'm telling you what she told me." That mattered too. I saved the information exactly that way. Not proof of motive. Proof of a pattern worth checking. On the drive back, memory came with me. Not the garage. Boston. I was 25 when the research placement offer arrived. Funded. 1 year. Access to equipment I had only read about. I printed the acceptance email at work because I wanted to hold it in my hand before telling anyone. That same week, Grandma Ruth had surgery. Ben was halfway through his final year of college and already talking about dropping out because he couldn't keep up with tuition and work. Chloe was 19. Mom sat beside me at the kitchen table and said, "This family cannot absorb one more disruption right now." She never told me not to go. That was the brilliance of it. She just listed what would fall apart if I did. Grandma needed rides. Ben needed help. Dad was traveling. Chloe was too young to carry adult responsibilities. Mom was exhausted. Then she touched my wrist and said, "You've always been the one we can count on." I deferred the placement. The deferment expired. I never went. For almost a year, I drove Grandma to appointments 3 mornings a week, helped Ben rewrite applications for emergency financial aid, and did laboratory contract work at night. When Ben graduated, Mom gave a speech about perseverance. I stood behind the grill turning burgers. No one had stolen anything from me. That was how I explained it for years. I had chosen, and technically, I had. What I had never asked was why choice always seemed to arrive at my feet already shaped like obligation. By late afternoon, Maya had preserved 3 separate sets of communications. None contained the original pitch. I called the magazine editor. Her name was Rachel Park. "I'm not asking for confidential source material," I said after introducing myself, "but your fact-check request includes statements about my company that are false. I need to understand which claims you need me to verify." Rachel was professional. She did not sound thrilled to discover a founder profile might have a source problem. She walked through the relevant sections: Chloe's early involvement, the garage story, the claim that Chloe had shaped Reform's community mission from the beginning. Then Rachel read a sentence attributed indirectly to me. "Grace always knew her sister would eventually stand beside her as a partner." I never said that. A pause. Understood. Was that pulled from an interview with me? No. With anyone employed by Reform? Not according to our notes. I leaned forward. Where did it come from? I can tell you it came from background material submitted before our formal reporting began. Submitted by Chloe? I can't answer that yet. Fair. I would have hated it if she casually handed me source details without checking. "Can you send me the factual claims you need corrected?" "Yes." "When is your final deadline?" "End of next week." "Not tomorrow." "Not tonight." There was time. Real time. The kind stories like mine often forgot existed because instant consequences sounded more dramatic. "Thank you," I said. After we ended the call, I opened my spreadsheet and added another line. Claim: Grace always intended Chloe to become a partner. Verified. False. Source: external background material. Then I stopped. The first instinct was to call Chloe immediately. Demand an explanation. Send her the conference biography. Ask how long she had been calling herself a co-founder. Instead, I waited. At 6:15, I sent one text. "We need to talk directly about Reform. No mom, no dad, no Ben carrying messages, just us." Chloe responded 11 minutes later. Fine. The next afternoon, we met at a coffee shop halfway between her apartment and my office. She arrived wearing oversized sunglasses even though it was cloudy. I did not comment. She sat across from me. "You made me withdraw from my honeymoon brunch. I didn't ask you to come today." Her mouth tightened. "You know what I mean. I know you agreed to meet." I placed my phone on the table, screen down. No folder. No lawyer. No grandpa. Just us. "Did you know that conference listed you as a co-founder?" Chloe looked toward the window. Yes. The answer hit harder because she did not pretend. "Why didn't you correct it?" "Because Mom said it was basically where things were heading." "Things? You giving me equity." "I never agreed to that." "She said you did." "What exactly did she say?" Chloe rubbed her thumb over the cardboard sleeve on her coffee cup. "She said after the investment round you told her 30% was fair." "I did not." "She said you were worried transferring it before the round would make the investors nervous." "I did not say that either." "She said you wanted to wait until after my wedding." "Chloe." Her eyes lifted. I never had that conversation. For the first time, certainty left her face. Then irritation replaced it. "So what? Mom invented every word?" "I don't know. You think I'm stupid." "I didn't say that. You always make it sound like everyone else is stupid when you start talking about documents and dates." There it was again. The old trap. If I was precise, I was cruel. If I softened facts, everyone was comfortable. My fingers curled beneath the table. "Do you have the messages?" "What messages?" "Anything where Mom told you I had agreed." Chloe leaned back. "You want me to hand you private conversations with Mom?" "I'm asking you to check whether what you remember being told exists in writing." "And then what?" "Then we know more than we know now." She stared at me. "You really can't just trust anyone, can you?" A laugh almost came out. Not because it was funny. Because I had trusted everyone involved. That was how we got here. I trust records when people are telling different stories. Chloe stood. "I'll think about it." I did not stop her. That decision surprised me more than anything she had said. All through childhood, if Chloe left angry, I followed. If she cried, I softened. If Mom said I had been too harsh, I apologized. This time, I stayed in my chair and finished my coffee. Thursday evening, an alarm appeared on my phone. Ceramics, 6:30. I stared at it in the parking lot outside Reform. I had registered for that class 3 times. The first time, Mom needed help organizing Grandma's storage unit. The second time, Chloe had a crisis with a vendor for her engagement party. The third time, Reform actually had an equipment failure. Every cancellation had been reasonable by itself. Together, they had become a life. Maya had the communications archive. Operations was stable. No one needed me. That realization created an almost physical discomfort. What did I do when no one needed me? Apparently, I made a bowl, a very bad one. The clay collapsed twice. The instructor showed me how I was pressing too hard. "Let the wheel do some of the work," she said. I nearly laughed. By the end of class, the bowl leaned slightly to one side. I loved it. For 90 minutes, my phone stayed inside my bag. When I finally checked it in the car, there were 9 messages. Most were from relatives. One was from Dad. "You are poisoning Chloe against her mother." Another from Mom. "I cannot believe you're using corporate lawyers to interrogate your own sister." No lawyer had spoken to Chloe. I typed 3 different replies. Deleted all 3. Then an email arrived from Rachel Park. Subject: Source clarification. I opened it. "Grace, we reviewed the original pitch materials after your factual objections. The first proposal describing Reform as a 2-sister founder story was submitted approximately 18 months ago." My heart began beating harder. I scrolled. Rachel had included the date. 18 months. Long before the wedding. Long before Dad had placed that folder beside the cake. Long before Chloe claimed I had supposedly agreed to give her 30%. Then, I reached the final line. The original pitch had not come from Chloe. It had come from Patricia Holloway, my mother. I opened the source detail Rachel had been authorized to share. The subject line was still intact. Our daughter's company. The subject line sat on my screen like something that had been waiting 18 months for me to notice it. Our daughter's company. Not Grace's company. Not Reform Fiber. Our daughter's company. I read Rachel's email again, then downloaded the source material she had been cleared to share. The attachment itself was brief, more of a story pitch than a press release, but the language was unmistakably Mom's. 2 sisters with complementary gifts. One brilliant with science. One gifted with people. A grandfather's garage. A family dream. A business built together. I stopped at that last phrase. Built together. The words made me think of actual building. Wit FIBA put under my fingernails. Rejected batches stacked against Grandpa's garage wall. Supplier calls made from my car, because I couldn't afford office space. The first month I paid myself nothing so I could make payroll for 3 people who had trusted me enough to leave steady jobs. Chloe had not been there. That did not mean she had never supported me. She had attended openings. She had brought friends to early community events. She had once helped me choose between 2 terrible logo designs. None of those things made her a founder. I printed Mom's pitch and laid it beside the wedding agreement. Then I opened a blank spreadsheet. At the top, I typed 4 words. Claim. Date. Source. Verification. That was how I handled a failed material batch when everyone in the plant had a theory. You did not begin with blame. You began with what could be established. The first row was the magazine pitch. The second was Chloe's conference biography. The third was the wedding agreement describing her historic co-founder contribution. Then I added every statement I could remember being attributed to me. Grace always knew Chloe would eventually stand beside her as a partner. False. Grace believed Chloe deserved a substantial ownership stake. False. Grace postponed the transfer only because of investor concerns. False. My phone rang before I finished the 5th row. Mom? I let it ring. A minute later, Dad called. Then Ben. Ben's name made my finger hover. For most of our adult lives, he had been the person who called after everyone else. Mom's upset. Dad didn't mean it like that. Chloe thinks you hate her. Can you just talk to them? He rarely created the conflict. He carried it from room to room. I declined the call and texted instead. If you need to tell me something from you, text me. If mom or dad asked you to call me, please don't. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. A minute passed. His reply came. Can we have lunch tomorrow? I stared at the message. That sounded like Ben, not like mom speaking through him. Yes. I returned to the spreadsheet. By noon, the pattern was no longer something I could dismiss as one exaggerated magazine pitch. The dates stretched backward, different wording, same shape. Somebody had been slowly turning Chloe from supportive younger sister into an essential early partner. And every time the story moved closer to ownership, mom appeared somewhere near the source. The question was no longer whether she had embellished my history. The question was why she needed Chloe and me to believe different versions of it. Ben chose a diner near his office the next day. He was already in a booth when I arrived, turning a sugar packet over between his fingers. You look terrible, he said. Thank you. You know what I mean. I didn't sleep much. He pushed a coffee toward the empty place across from him. I ordered it black. That made me smile despite myself. Ben remembered how I drank coffee. Mom still asked whether I wanted cream every Christmas. I sat down. He looked at my cheek, where the last faint discoloration had mostly disappeared beneath makeup. Did Mom really hit you? Yes. His jaw moved. I didn't see it. I know. Dad said you were waving paperwork in her face. I was holding the paperwork they brought me. Ben looked down. For a moment, I could almost watch him trying to choose between the version he had been given and the person sitting in front of him. I did not help him. That was new too. Usually, silence made me nervous enough to fill it. This time I drank my coffee. Eventually, he said, Mom wants me to convince you to stop digging through old messages. Did she say why? She said you're twisting private conversations into evidence against everyone. Have I asked you for private conversations? No. Have I asked you to take anyone's side? No. He rubbed both hands over his face. Grace, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Tell me what you know. Don't tell me what Mom thinks. Don't tell me what Chloe thinks. Tell me what you personally know. That seemed to unsettle him, more than an accusation would have. Ben pulled out his phone. I think I've been doing something stupid for a long time. He unlocked it and scrolled. Mom asks me to pass things along. I know. No, I mean constantly. He turned the phone toward me. One message was from almost a year earlier. Can you explain to Grace that Chloe isn't asking to take anything from her? She hears everything as a business negotiation when it comes from me. Another was from 3 months later. Tell Chloe Grace isn't angry with her. She's stressed about the investors and doesn't know how to separate work from family. A third. Please ask Grace why she hasn't called Chloe. Don't tell her I asked. I read them without touching his phone. Were you doing it? Sometimes. What would you tell Chloe? What Mom told me. And what would you tell me? He grimaced. Usually that Chloe felt left out. Did Chloe ask you to say that? Sometimes. Sometimes Mom said Chloe had said it. The distinction landed harder than I expected. How often did you confirm directly with Chloe? Ben gave a small, miserable laugh. Almost never. The waitress appeared beside us and asked whether we were ready to order. Neither of us had opened a menu. Ben ordered a sandwich. I ordered soup. Only after she walked away did he say, I thought I was keeping everyone from fighting. I looked at him. That sentence belonged to me. I had used some version of it for years. Keeping everyone from fighting. Keeping Mom from worrying. Keeping Chloe from feeling overshadowed. Keeping Dad from getting angry. We had treated peace like a household appliance that failed whenever one of us stopped maintaining it. What happens if you stop? I asked. Ben frowned. Stop what? Carrying messages. He glanced at his phone. I guess they'd have to talk to each other. Exactly. He sat very still. Then, he locked the screen. I'm done. I did not tell him I was proud of him. That would have turned his decision into something he had made for me. Instead, I nodded. Good. When lunch ended, Ben did not ask me to call Mom. That might have been the most unusual part of the entire conversation. Chloe contacted me that evening. Can we meet tomorrow? I answered immediately. Yes. No, Mom. Her reply came faster. Obviously. It wasn't obvious. But I let that pass. We met at my townhouse, instead of a cafe this time. I made coffee. Chloe declined it. She sat at the far end of my kitchen table, purse still hanging from one shoulder as though she wanted to preserve the option of leaving quickly. I found some of the messages, she said. Some? I'm not giving you my entire conversation with Mom. I didn't ask you to. You asked for proof. I asked whether what she told you existed in writing. Chloe pulled out her phone. It does. She scrolled, then placed the device between us. Mom's message was dated shortly after Reform's investment round. Grace knows you deserve part of this. She told me 30% would be fair, but she's worried investors will call it nepotism if she does it too soon. My stomach tightened. Keep scrolling. Chloe did. Another message. Don't push her right now. She gets territorial when she feels like people are questioning whether she did everything alone. I looked up. She told me the opposite. What? I pulled out my own phone and opened a thread with Mom from nearly the same period. Chloe isn't asking you for ownership, Grace. She just wants you to acknowledge that she helped make Reform relatable. You always assume people want something from you. Chloe read it. Her eyebrows drew together. That's not what she told me. I know. She said you were angry I was getting attention. Mom told me you weren't asking for anything except recognition. I was asking about equity. That admission hung between us. I kept my voice level. How much? Not at first. Clue. She looked away. Mom said 30% eventually. And you believed you were entitled to that? She said you had already decided it. That isn't what I asked. Chloe's mouth tightened. Yes. The word was quiet. At least it was true. Why? She stared at the grain of my kitchen table. Because everyone always said I was the part you didn't have. What does that mean? You know exactly what it means. No. Tell me. Her eyes snapped up. You were the genius. You built everything. You knew the science, the numbers, the manufacturing. But every time you had to talk to normal people, you acted like they were wasting your time. That's not true. It felt true. I almost argued. Then stopped. Her feeling did not create ownership. But it was still her feeling. Go on. Mom said I was the person who made people understand you. That without that, Reform would have stayed some weird science project in Grandpa's garage. Something cold moved through me. It was the childhood sentence again, only grown up. Grace does the complicated part. Chloe makes people care. Did you ever believe you founded Reform? No. Did you know the conference called you a co-founder? Yes. Did you correct them? No. Why? Her chin lifted defensively. Because by then, Mom had been saying for months that you were going to make it official. You still knew the title wasn't true. Yes. There it was. Not innocence. Not conspiracy mastermind. Something messier. Chloe had been lied to about what I intended, and she had still chosen to enjoy a title she had not earned. Both things could be true. I'm not going to pretend that part away, I said. I didn't ask you to. You will eventually. Her face reddened. That's unfair. Maybe. But I'm telling you now so neither of us gets to rewrite this later. She stood abruptly. For a second, I thought she was leaving. Instead, she crossed to the kitchen window and folded her arms. Mom told me you said I was the reason investors understood the company. I never said that. She said you were embarrassed to admit it because you wanted everyone to think you did everything yourself. I never said that either. Chloe turned. You're telling me she made all of it up? I'm telling you I didn't say those things. That's different. Yes. She stared at me. Then she started scrolling again. I want to see your messages. I handed over the phone. For nearly 20 minutes, we sat across from each other reading. Not every conversation, only the ones connected to Reform, ownership, speaking events, and what Mom claimed one sister had said about the other. The same dates began appearing. On one afternoon, Mom told me Chloe wanted only symbolic recognition. Less than an hour later, she told Chloe I was withholding the ownership I had already promised. Another week, Mom told me Chloe felt guilty that people exaggerated her role. That same evening, she told Chloe I was furious that people were finally noticing what she contributed. One mother. One day. Two realities. Chloe lowered my phone very slowly. She told me you hated me. The room seemed to shrink around the sentence. Mom told me you were jealous of me. I was jealous of you. Her honesty startled me. Of what? You never had to ask permission to be important. I almost laughed, but her face stopped me. From where Chloe stood, maybe that had been true. She had seen the company, the magazine interviews, the employees. She had not seen how quickly I became 16 again when Mom sighed. I spent years thinking you were the one Mom actually loved, I said. Chloe's eyes filled, but she blinked hard and looked away. And I spent years thinking she had to defend me from you. Neither statement absolved us. That mattered. Mom had created the road. We had still walked down it. My phone buzzed on the table. Dad. Then another notification. An email from Reform's board chair. Grace, we received a question from Investor Relations concerning inconsistent public descriptions of the company's founding team. Please send verified founder history and supporting records before our scheduled governance call. I read it twice. The lie had crossed the line I had been trying to contain. It was no longer only about Mom, or Chloe, or a wedding folder. It was touching the company, my company, the people who worked there, the investors who had relied on accurate disclosures. Chloe saw my expression. What? I showed her the email. She went pale. Are you in trouble? No. How do you know? Because the ownership records are clear. What are you going to do? That question changed something. Not what are we going to do? Not what should Mom do? What are you going to do? I'm correcting the record. Chloe sat down again. Wait. For what? We need to talk to Mom first. No. Grace. I already know what I founded. I know what the corporate records say. I know what the lab notebooks say. I know what the supplier invoices say. I don't need Mom to agree with any of that. But if she explains, she can explain herself later. What if this makes everything worse? I looked at the two phones lying side by side. It already got worse while we were trying to keep everything calm. Chloe said nothing. I'm sending the verified history whether you help me or not. Her face changed. You do that to me? No, I'm doing it for Reform. That's the same thing. It isn't. For once, I did not soften the distinction. The next morning, I built the packet myself. The incorporation documents came first, then the founder's stock records, the earliest grant application with my name as sole applicant, supplier invoices from the garage period, numbered laboratory notebooks showing dates, failed trials, revisions, and materials sources. Grandpa's photographs went in as supporting context, not as the core proof. Maya checked the chronology. She found 2 duplicate file names and 1 date I had entered incorrectly. November, not October, she said. I corrected it. Outside counsel reviewed the final packet only for confidentiality and disclosure concerns. No one told me what decision to make. No one needed to. By early afternoon, the verified record was ready. I sent it to Rachel, then the conference organizer, then the board. My finger trembled slightly when I clicked the last button. Not because I doubted the facts. Because some part of me still believed putting the truth in writing was an act of aggression. I waited for guilt to make me undo something. Nothing happened. The emails remained sent. That evening, Dad called 6 times. He left 1 voicemail. Your mother has done nothing but support you, Grace. Now you're dragging private family conversations into a business dispute and turning Chloe against her. Call me before you do any more damage. I deleted it. Mom sent a shorter message. You always have to win. I stared at those 5 words. For years, I would have answered immediately. This isn't about winning. I love you. I love Chloe. I don't want anyone hurt. I only want everyone to understand. Instead, I set the phone down. Understanding was not my job anymore. 2 nights later, I met my friends Hannah and Elise for dinner. We had known one another since graduate school, yet somehow the last year had reduced us to birthday texts and promises that we would definitely get together soon. Twice, I almost canceled. Once because Mom had sent a message saying Grandpa was very upset about all this. I called Grandpa directly. He was watching a baseball game. I'm not upset with you, he said. Your mother called. I told her I wasn't discussing you with her. That ended that emergency. The second time, Chloe texted asking whether the magazine had replied. I told her I would let her know when there was verified information. Then I put on a jacket and left the house. Dinner felt awkward for the first 10 minutes. Not because Hannah or Elise did anything wrong, because no one needed me to solve anything. Hannah complained about a contractor. Elise told us about killing 3 houseplants in a month. Nobody handed me a crisis. Nobody asked me to mediate. At one point I realized I had been laughing long enough that my face hurt. It was almost embarrassing how unfamiliar that felt. On the drive home, I thought about the crooked ceramic bowl drying on a shelf at the studio. Dinner. Clay. 90 minutes, without rescuing anyone. None of it looked important enough to call rebuilding a life. Maybe that was why I had ignored those things for so long. They did not prove anything. They simply belonged to me. At home, I found a message from Ben. Mom asked me to call and tell you to stop sending documents around. Below it was another line. I told her no. I smiled. Then Chloe's name appeared. She had sent a PDF. Her message read, I found the version Mom sent me before the wedding. You need to see the last paragraph. I opened the file. Most of it repeated what I had already seen. Grace had supposedly become protective of ownership. Chloe had supposedly been promised recognition. The wedding was described as the right moment to bring the family back into balance. Then I reached the final paragraph. Mom had written it less than 2 weeks before Chloe's wedding. Once Grace signs, no one can question the story anymore. It will finally be true on paper. The sentence stayed on my screen until the words stopped looking like English. Once Grace signs, no one can question the story anymore. It will finally be true on paper. I read it again, then once more, not because I needed help understanding it, because some part of me was still searching for a version that hurt less. There wasn't one. Mom had known the story was not true. The wedding paperwork had not been meant to recognize something Chloe had already earned. It had been meant to manufacture proof for a story Mom had been telling long enough that even she seemed to believe she had the right to make it real. I saved Chloe's PDF to the folder on my laptop and wrote down the date it had been created. Then I called her. She answered almost immediately. You saw it? Yes. Silence filled the line. What are you going to do? Chloe asked. I need the rest of the messages related to reform. Her breathing changed. You said you didn't need my whole conversation with Mom. I don't. I need anything about ownership, the founder story, media interviews, speaking events, or what she told you I supposedly said. Why? So I don't make the same mistake she did. What mistake? Choosing the story I like before I know what the record says. Chloe went quiet again. Then she said, I'll send what I have. By morning, there were 27 screenshots and 4 exported email threads in my inbox. I did not read them in bed. That mattered. For years, bad news from home had been allowed to enter any room I occupied. Kitchen, office, hotel, vacation, midnight, dawn. If someone else created an emergency, I treated my own attention like public property. I showered first, made coffee, ate breakfast at my table without opening my laptop. Only then did I start. Some of the messages were exactly what I expected. Mom suggesting phrases for Chloe to use in interviews. Mom telling her to say we instead of Grace when discussing the early years. Mom correcting Chloe when she called herself a supporter. You were more than that, sweetheart. Don't diminish yourself, just because Grace likes titles to sound technical. My jaw tightened. Then I found something worse. 6 months before the wedding, Chloe had sent Mom a screenshot of a conference registration form. They want my official title. What do I put? Mom replied, co-founder and community strategy. Chloe, but technically I'm not. Mom, technicality is Grace's favorite shield. You helped make reform what it is. Use the title. There was a 10-minute gap. Then Chloe responded, okay. I leaned back. That one word did not erase what Mom had done. It also did not erase Chloe's choice. I called her again. You knew. She did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes. You knew the title wasn't accurate. Yes. And you used it anyway. I told you I did. You told me you let a conference use it. I filled it in myself. That distinction hurt. Not because I had believed Chloe innocent. Because there was something seductive about blaming one architect for the whole structure. It let everyone else become a victim of design. Real life was less generous. Mom had built the conditions. Chloe had benefited from them. Ben had carried messages. Dad had enforced whatever version kept Mom's authority intact. And I had spent years repairing the damage afterward. I'm not going to use Mom's manipulation to erase your part, I said. I know. Do you? Yes, Grace. Her voice sharpened. I know I liked it. I know people looked at me differently when they thought I built something worth $50 million. Is that what you want me to say? No. What do you want then? The truth without me dragging it out of you. Her breathing came through the speaker. Then quieter, she said. I liked being important. That landed differently. Not better, but cleaner. Thank you, I said. For what? For saying the sentence yourself. Before she could answer, another call appeared on my screen. Dad. I ignored it. Chloe noticed the pause. Is that him? Yes. He wants everyone at the house tonight. I know. You're going? Yes. Why? I looked at the open messages. Because I want to ask Mom 3 questions to her face. What questions? You'll hear them. Dad called again. He let it ring. That evening, I drove to the house where I had spent most of my childhood. Nothing about it looked dangerous. Porch light. Trimmed hedge. The ceramic planter Mom changed with the seasons. For years, I had confused familiar with safe. Ben's car was already outside. Grandpa's was not. He had called earlier. If you need me there for the garage question, I'll come, he said. I do. Then I'll come. But only answer what you personally know. There was a pause. Kiddo, I'm 82. I have no desire to make up extra work for myself. I smiled. Thank you. Mom opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes went immediately to the folder under my arm. You brought documents. Yes. I thought we were having a family conversation. We are. Her mouth tightened. Dad stood behind her. This isn't a board meeting. No. Then stop acting like one. I stepped inside. The dining table was already set, though no food had been served. That was Mom's favorite environment for conflict. Placemats. Water glasses. Napkins. Everything arranged so the person upsetting the room looked even more unreasonable. Chloe sat on one side. Ben on the other. I took the chair nearest the end. Mom noticed. You usually sit over here. I'm fine here. A small thing. Still, her eyes stayed on me for a second too long. Grandpa arrived 5 minutes later. Mom looked displeased. Dad, this doesn't concern you. You used my garage in the story, he said. That part concerns me. He sat beside Ben. Dad closed the dining room door. Let's get one thing straight, he said. No recordings, no threats, no sending private family conversations to your lawyers. I haven't threatened anyone. You sent documents to your board. Company records to the company's board. You see? This is exactly what I mean. I opened my folder. Dad slapped his palm lightly against the table. For once, Grace. Stop hiding behind paperwork. My hand paused. The old shame came immediately. Difficult. Cold. Technical. I heard every version, without anyone saying the words. Then I remembered the line from Mom's message. Once Grace signs, no one can question the story anymore. Paperwork had not created this problem. It had simply survived it. I placed 3 pages on the table. I have 3 questions. Mom leaned back. This is ridiculous. Did you tell Chloe I had promised her 30% of reform? Her expression did not change. I told Chloe what I understood you intended. That wasn't my question. Dad cut in. You're cross-examining your mother. I looked at him. I asked her a yes or no question. Mom's fingers tightened around her water glass. You talked for years about wanting Chloe involved. Involved is not 30% ownership. Did you tell her I promised it? I may have said you recognized what she contributed. Chloe spoke. You told me she agreed. Mom turned toward her. Chloe, sweetheart. This is exactly why I didn't want you pulled into all these details. The word sweetheart made something in Chloe's face close. I moved to the second page. Did you tell me Chloe only wanted symbolic recognition? Mom looked at me. She did it first. Chloe straightened. No, I was already asking you about equity then. Mom's eyes flashed. I was trying to keep both of you from fighting. By telling us different things? Chloe asked. By managing two very different personalities. That sentence was so familiar. I almost missed what it meant. Managing. Not helping. Not listening. Managing. I slid the third page into the center. Did you write this? Mom looked down. Once Grace signs, no one can question the story anymore. It will finally be true on paper. Nobody spoke. Dad, read it. His jaw hardened. Then, instead of looking at Mom, he looked at me. Why do you have this? Chloe laughed once. It was short and ugly. Seriously? Dad ignored her. That was private. It was sent to me, I said. By your sister. Yes. So, now you're encouraging Chloe to betray her mother? There it was. A document showed Mom knowingly trying to make a false story true on paper, and the problem had already become how I obtained the document. I felt strangely calm. Dad, did you know she wrote this? He did not answer. Mom placed both palms on the table. This is being twisted into something ugly. I looked at her. Then untwist it. I was trying to protect Chloe. From what? From being erased. Chloe stared at her. Big Grace? Yes. The word came too quickly. Mom turned toward Chloe fully now. You spent your whole life standing beside someone who takes all the oxygen out of a room without realizing she does it. The sentence should have crushed me. Once, it would have. But Chloe was not looking at me. She was looking at Mom. You told her I only wanted recognition. I was trying to calm her down. You told me she had already agreed to give me shares. I was trying to give you confidence. You told a magazine we founded the company together. Because you helped. I didn't found it. Mom's mouth opened. Chloe kept going. I helped at events. I talked about it. I liked being introduced as important. I let people call me something I wasn't. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. That was wrong. Mom stared at her as if Chloe had switched languages. Don't let Grace make you ashamed of supporting your own family. Grace. My name turned into a weapon again. Chloe's chair scraped backward. She didn't make me say that. You don't understand what she's doing. I understand enough. Mom's face changed. The softness disappeared. All those years I defended you when Grace made everything about achievement, and now you're going to sit there and turn on me? Chloe went white. For one strange second, I saw the mechanism as clearly as anything I had ever studied under a microscope. Golden Child was not a permanent position. It was a contract. Chloe had simply violated the terms. Mom looked toward Ben. Tell her. Ben froze. Tell her what? He asked. That Grace has always resented her. Ben glanced at me, then back at Mom. I don't know that. Yes, you do. No. Benjamin. His shoulders stiffened. That full name tone had worked on all three of us since childhood. Mom, Ben said, if you want to tell Chloe something, tell Chloe. I am telling her. No. You're asking me to say it for you. Mom stared at him. Ben put his phone on the table. I'm not doing that anymore. Nobody moved. It was not dramatic. No one applauded. But I had never heard him say those words before. Grandpa broke the silence. Patricia. Mom turned sharply. What? You told people Grace and Chloe started the company in my garage. I said the idea grew out of the garage. Grace's work grew out of the garage. You always treated Grace like she was the special one. Grandpa's eyebrows rose. I almost interrupted, then stopped myself. He did not need me to manage his conversation either. I treated the kid who showed up with buckets of pulp like the kid who showed up with buckets of pulp, he said. That's all I can tell you. Mom looked away. For the first time, no one rushed to rescue the silence. I let it sit. Dad eventually stood. This meeting is over. No, Mom said. Her voice was quieter now. She looked at me. You wanted everyone against me. Congratulations. That one found the old bruise. Not because it was true. Because She knew how badly I feared being the reason people left. I looked around the table. Chloe crying silently, but staying in her chair. Ben staring at his hands. Grandpa tired. Dad furious. Then I looked back at Mom. I didn't ask anyone here to choose me. You didn't have to. I asked what was true. And look what you've done. The apology rose automatically. I felt it in my throat. I swallowed it. No. Mom blinked. No what? I'm not taking responsibility for the fact that people heard your own words. Her lips parted. I closed the folder. That was the end of the conversation for me. Not because everything had been resolved. Because nothing else I said could make her take responsibility. I stood. Chloe followed me outside. The porch light caught the wet tracks on her cheeks. Grace. I turned. She wrapped her arms around herself. The magazine is going to correct it, right? Yes. The conference too? If they verify what I sent, yes. Her face crumpled slightly. What am I supposed to do? It was almost the same question she had asked me at the wedding. Then, I had told her she was 31. Now I waited. She took a breath. I'm going to look like a liar. You used a title you knew wasn't accurate. I know. I'm not saying that to punish you. I know. She looked toward the house. Can you give me something real? I frowned. What do you mean? A role. My stomach dropped. Chloe, not co-founder. I get that. She spoke faster. Director, advisor, community strategy. Whatever makes sense. If I actually have a position, then at least people won't think everything I said was fake. There it was. The old invitation. Someone I loved was standing in front of a consequence. All I had to do was step between them. Again, I could create a title, a consulting agreement, a ceremonial advisory position, something respectable enough to soften the embarrassment. The company could absorb it. That was the dangerous part. I could rescue her. Easily. Do you want to work at Reform? I asked. She hesitated. I want to fix this. That's not what I asked. I could do communications. We have a communications director. Community outreach. We have people doing that too. Her eyes sharpened. So there's nothing? If you ever want a job at Reform, you can apply for one you're qualified to do when there's an opening. Her mouth fell open. You'd make me apply? Yes. I'm your sister. I know. And the shares? No. The word came more easily this time. Chloe looked toward the door, as if hoping someone would come outside and explain me back into the person she remembered. Nobody did. What am I supposed to tell people? She whispered. The truth. She flinched. I hated that. I hated seeing her afraid. I hated knowing I could make the fear smaller with one compromise. But every rescue I had ever performed had taught my family the same lesson. Grace will absorb it. Grace will fix it. Grace will make sure no one else pays the full price. I'm sorry, I said. Her eyes lifted. For what? That this is painful. I held her gaze. Not for saying no. 2 days later, Rachel emailed that the magazine had verified the founder record. The piece would identify me as Reform's founder and Chloe accurately as my sister, with no claim of early ownership or technical founding work. The conference organizer contacted Chloe directly. They offered her the choice to appear under an accurate description of her background or withdraw from the founder panel. Chloe withdrew. No lawsuit. No public shaming campaign. Just a door closing, because the name on the badge had never been hers. At Reform, I presented the situation to the board. I proposed that all external descriptions of company history come from a verified corporate record. No relatives would represent Reform at events without written authorization. Guest credentials would be issued for specific events instead of treated as permanent access. One board member asked, "Is this aimed at your parents?" "No," I said. "It applies to everyone." That distinction mattered to me. I did not want company policy shaped as punishment. I wanted a system that no longer depended on my willingness to tolerate blurred lines. The board approved the changes after discussion. Maya stayed behind when the meeting ended. "You know this means I'm going to tell you no more often." I looked at her. To what? To rewriting your own statements at midnight because you think no one else can get the tone exactly right. Despite everything, I laughed. That wasn't in the proposal. It should have been. She gathered her papers. Let me run communications, Grace. The sentence stayed with me. Not let me save you. Let me do the job you hired me to do. That afternoon, I approved the first draft of the Reform Materials Apprenticeship pilot. Then I stopped myself before rewriting the entire operating plan. I added a note instead. Hire program director before launch. A year earlier, I would have created the program, run it, mentored everyone in it, managed the budget, reviewed the applications, and eventually resented how exhausted I was. Being useful had become such a deeply rooted reflex that I could turn even a good idea into another way to disappear. This time, I wanted to build something, without becoming the scaffolding holding every wall up. That evening, ceramics class smelled faintly of wet clay and dust. My crooked bowl had survived firing. The instructor handed it to me. One side leaned visibly higher than the other. It has character, she said. It has structural issues. She laughed. Not everything is a materials test. I ran my thumb along the uneven rim. Maybe not. My phone stayed in my bag until class ended. When I checked it afterward, the extended family group chat had exploded. Mom had written a long message saying I had destroyed Chloe's speaking opportunity, humiliated my parents in front of Grandpa, and used company resources to punish relatives over a private disagreement. Responses followed. Aunt Denise wrote that success had changed me. A cousin said I had forgotten where I came from. Someone else asked whether 30% would really have killed me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could answer every accusation. I had documents, dates, message, more proof than anyone in that chat could reasonably want. For 15 years, I had believed the person with the clearest explanation could restore peace. I typed one paragraph, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Then I wrote, I'm not arguing private family history in a group chat. Reform's corporate record is being corrected by the organizations responsible for publishing it. I won't discuss company ownership here. I sent it, then muted the chat. Mom called almost immediately. I did not answer. Dad called next. I did not answer him either. Ben sent a text. She asked me to tell you you're tearing everyone apart. A second message arrived. I told her if she wants to say that, she can say it herself. I smiled and put the crooked bowl on the passenger seat. When I got home, Rachel's name was in my inbox. Her message was short. We've completed verification and can correct the founder's story without turning the article into a family dispute. I exhaled. Then I read the next sentence. There is one editorial question we need you to answer. Below it, Rachel had written, Do you want the source of the original false founder claim identified? I stared at the screen. For weeks, Mom had counted on my fear of embarrassing her. Now the decision was mine. I could attach her name to the lie in public. I could let every person who had admired her version of our family see exactly where the story began. For the first time in my life, I had the power to make my mother feel the humiliation she had always been so willing to use on me, and I had to decide whether having that power meant I should use it. I left Rachel's email open while the kettle boiled. Do you want the source of the original false founder claim identified? My mother's name sat in the notes beneath that question. For several minutes, I imagined what would happen if I said yes. The magazine would not need to call her a liar. It would not need to use words like manipulation or deception. It could simply state that Patricia Holloway had supplied the original account, describing Reform as a company founded by two sisters. The facts would do the rest. People from the Chamber of Commerce would read it. The women whose charity lunches Mom attended would read it. The people she had introduced me to by saying, "We always knew our girls would build something together," would finally understand that there had never been an hour. The thought gave me a sharp, shameful satisfaction. For less than a minute. Then the feeling changed. I had spent most of my life reacting to whatever Mom placed in front of me. A guilty younger sister. An upset father. An exhausted grandmother. An angry relative. A room that needed calming. Even when I resisted her, she still determined where I stood. If I chose public humiliation, simply because I finally had the power to inflict it, she would still be deciding what kind of person I became. I carried my coffee to the table and typed slowly. Rachel, please correct the founder history using the verified record. If your editorial standards require an explanation of how the inaccurate information entered the reporting process, handle that according to your normal practices. I am not requesting that my mother be identified, and I will not participate in turning this into a public family dispute. I read it twice. Then I pressed send. Nothing dramatic happened. No rush of triumph. No sudden forgiveness. Just a quiet click. For once, restraint did not feel like surrender. It felt like mine. The corrected article went live 3 days later. I was in the pilot plant when Maya found me. She held up her phone. It's published. I stripped off my gloves. Anything unexpected? No. That word had become one of my favorites. Maya handed me the phone. The headline focused on Reform's new manufacturing expansion, not my relatives. The founder description was simple. Grace Holloway, a materials scientist who developed the company's earliest fiber formulations while working in her grandfather's garage. Chloe appeared once, accurately, as my younger sister, who had attended some later community events. No co-founder. No family dream. No invented promise. No accusation against Mom. The truth did not look explosive on the page. It looked ordinary. That might have been the most satisfying part. All the chaos that had swallowed weeks of my life reduced to a few accurate sentences. Maya watched me scroll. You okay? Yes. You don't sound relieved. I think I expected the truth to feel louder. She smiled slightly. Most corrections aren't very cinematic. Good. I handed the phone back. I'm tired of cinematic. She laughed and returned to her office. I stayed beside the forming line for another minute, listening to the steady mechanical hum. 11 years earlier, I had stood in Grandpa's garage, wondering whether I could make a sheet of fiber strong enough not to split when folded. Now production samples moved down a line I had once been unable to imagine affording. Mom had tried to turn that history into a story about 2 daughters. The magazine had corrected it in a paragraph. The company had survived. So had I. A week later, our new external communications policy took effect. The changes were boring by design. Guest credentials expired after each event. Only authorized employees could represent Reform publicly. Biographical materials came from one verified company record. Anyone using the company name or logo for an outside event needed written approval. None of the policies mentioned Patricia or Neil Holloway. They did not have to. Mom discovered the difference when she tried to register for a regional manufacturing dinner under the affiliation she had used for years. Reform Fiber. Founder Family. Maya forwarded me the verification request. Do you authorize Patricia Holloway as a representative of Reform Fiber? I typed one word. No. 2 hours later, Mom called. I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad called. I let that go too. Mom tried again. This time I answered. What did you do? She demanded. I leaned back in my office chair. What are you referring to? The manufacturing dinner. I told them you don't represent Reform. I have attended those events for years. As my guest, I introduced you to half those people. That still doesn't make you part of the company. There was a pause. Then she laughed once. Coldly. You're enjoying this. No. Don't lie to me. I'm not. You took Chloe's conference away. Now you're cutting your own parents out of the business. It isn't your business. The silence afterward lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then Dad's voice came through in the background. Put her on speaker. A second later, he was there. You listen to me, Grace. Whatever paperwork says, that company came from this family. No. It came from work I did while I happened to be part of this family. You used Samuel's garage. With his permission. We supported you, and I've never denied that. Then why are you acting like we're strangers? I looked through the glass wall of my office. 2 engineers were standing over a sample table, arguing cheerfully about coating thickness. Maya was walking toward a conference room, carrying 3 folders. People were doing their jobs. No one outside that phone call was confused about who had authority. I'm not treating you like strangers, I said. I'm treating Reform like a company. Mom Kutin, your father and I should not need permission to support our own daughter. Support doesn't require a badge. That is cruel. No, it's a boundary. Dad exhaled loudly. You sound like a corporate handbook. The old insult had changed clothes. Too technical. Do rigid. Too cold. I almost smiled. Then this should be easy to remember. I ended the call before either of them could turn it into another hour. My hands shook afterward. Not much. Enough that I noticed. I placed both palms flat on the desk and waited until they stopped. Setting a boundary did not make my body forget 37 years of consequences. It only meant the shaking no longer made the decision for me. Mom's real response came the following Sunday. She called just after noon. I was sanding the bottom of my second ceramic bowl at my kitchen table. The first crooked one sat on the windowsill, permanently leaning left. The new one was better. Not perfect. Better. I almost ignored the call. Then, I decided I wanted to know whether anything had changed. Hello. Mom's voice was controlled. I hope proving your point was worth what you did to your sister. My fingers stopped on the sandpaper. What did I do to Chloe? She lost that conference. She withdrew after they asked her to use an accurate title. You knew what would happen. I knew there would be consequences. You humiliated her. She used a title she knew wasn't hers. And there it is. What? That satisfaction. I looked at the pale dust collecting beneath the bowl. There had been a time when I would have spent the next 40 minutes trying to convince her I was not cruel. I would have described every sleepless night, every effort to protect Chloe. Every time I had softened the truth, I would have begged the person accusing me to approve my intentions. Instead, I asked, "Are you calling to take responsibility for what you told both of us?" Mom went quiet. "I'm calling because I'm still your mother." That doesn't answer the question. You really have changed. Yes. The word surprised both of us. Mom recovered first. Success has made you hard. No. I think saying no just sounds hard to people who were used to hearing yes. Her breath caught. I continued before fear could pull me backward. If we are going to have a relationship, some things have to change. So now I have rules? Yes. You cannot be serious. I am. I put the bowl down. No talking to Ben about what you want me to hear. No asking Chloe to speak for you. No using Reform's name or representing yourself as connected to company leadership. And I am not discussing shares again. Anything else, Your Majesty? The sarcasm barely touched me. Yes. Another silence. If you want to repair this, you have to acknowledge what happened. You told Chloe I had promised her ownership when I hadn't. You told me she only wanted recognition when she wanted equity. You gave outsiders a false founder story. And you used different versions of each of us to keep us from speaking directly. Mom's answer was immediate. I did what I thought was best for both of you. That is not acknowledgement. I'm sorry you've decided to see everything I did as malicious. There it was. Almost an apology. Close enough to tempt the old version of me. I closed my eyes. No. What? That isn't an apology I can build anything on. So what, you're cutting me off? For now, I'm stepping back. Grace, I'm not doing this to punish you. You already have. No. I'm doing it because every conversation becomes another argument about whether what happened actually happened. Her voice cracked for the first time. I am your mother. I know. I meant it. That was why the next sentence was so difficult. And that doesn't make this acceptable. I ended the call gently. Then I sat at my kitchen table with the unfinished bowl between my hands and cried for the first time since the wedding. Not because I regretted what I had said. Because some childish part of me had still expected the right evidence to produce the right mother. I had believed that if I could prove enough, explain enough, remain calm enough, she would eventually look at me and say, I see it now. The documents had corrected the company record. They could not correct her. That loss had no spreadsheet column. Dad sent one message that evening. Your mother and I come together. If you exclude her, you exclude me. I read it once. Then replied, I understand your choice. Nothing else. No argument. No plea. He did not answer. The quiet that followed lasted nearly 3 months. At first, every Sunday felt wrong. I kept expecting a crisis. A call about Grandpa. A request from Ben. A message from Chloe. Some reason I would be needed badly enough that my boundaries became selfish again. Instead, life kept occurring without permission. Reform hired a program director for the apprenticeship pilot. Her name was Tasha Morgan, and during our second meeting she crossed out nearly half the responsibilities I had assigned myself. "You're the CEO," she said. "Why are you reviewing every application?" "I want quality control." "You hired me for quality control." "That's not exactly what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." I stared at the marked-up page, then laughed. "Fine. Fine as in you agree, or fine as in you'll wait until midnight and put yourself back into the document." "I hate how well Maya has briefed you." Tasha grinned. "I've never met Maya." That was worse. I removed my name from the application review process. It felt irresponsible for approximately 3 days. Then, nothing collapsed. The pilot accepted its first 12 apprentices. I attended orientation, spoke for 20 minutes, and left the program director to run her program. On Thursday nights, I kept going to ceramics. Hannah and Elise became regular dinner companions again. Sometimes we talked about work. Mostly we didn't. I began walking around the lake near my townhouse on Saturday mornings without headphones. The first few times, my mind tried to turn the walk into productivity. Solve the coding problem. Plan the next board agenda. Call Ben. Check whether Chloe had corrected another biography. Eventually, the walking became just walking. I discovered I liked not being useful for an hour. 4 months after the wedding, Chloe texted, "Could we get coffee?" I stared at the message, longer than necessary, then answered, "Yes." We met at the same cafe where I had first asked her for Mom's messages. Chloe arrived early. No oversized sunglasses this time. She looked nervous. "I corrected the last organization," she said after we ordered. "The civic group?" "Yes." "Good." She wrapped both hands around her cup. They removed the founder reference. I nodded. "Okay." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's all? What were you expecting?" "I don't know. Praise. Maybe. Forgiveness. A certificate of completion." I understood the impulse. We had grown up in a house where approval was currency. Chloe looked down. "I need to say something." I waited. She inhaled slowly. "Mum lied to me." "I know. But that's not the whole thing." I said nothing. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the cup. "I liked being called a founder." The cafe noise seemed to fade slightly. Chloe kept going. "I knew I hadn't built the company. I knew I didn't know the science. I knew I had never worked those nights you worked, but when people introduced me that way, they listened differently." Her face flushed. "I liked it." "Why are you telling me now?" "Because every time I rehearsed an apology, I kept saying Mom made me do it." I watched her carefully. "And?" "She didn't." Chloe swallowed. "She made it easier. She told me I deserved it. She told me you were keeping something from me, but I still knew that word wasn't mine." Something in my chest loosened. Not healed. Not erased. Loosened. "I appreciate you saying that. I don't expect shares." "Good." A weak smile crossed her face. "I don't expect a job either." "Also good." She almost laughed. Then her eyes became serious again. "Can we ever be sisters?" The question hurt in a different way than accusation did. "We already are. You know what I mean." I looked through the window at people crossing the street. "I don't want to go back." Her expression fell. I continued. "But maybe we can build something new." "What does that mean?" "It means if you're angry with me, you tell me. You don't tell Mom and wait for her to translate." Chloe nodded. "If I'm angry with you, I tell you." Another nod. "No ownership discussions." "I understand. No pretending the last year didn't happen because talking about it is uncomfortable." Her mouth tightened. "Okay. And I'm not rescuing you from Mom." Chloe looked down. "That one might be mutual." For the first time, I laughed with my sister about something that had once defined us. Not enough to erase the past. Enough to make a second cup of coffee possible. 6 months after the wedding, the apprenticeship program held its first open house. 12 participants stood beside sample stations in the training lab, explaining processes to visitors. One young woman named Marisol showed Grandpa a sheet made from agricultural waste and corrected him politely when he called it cardboard. He looked delighted. I stood near the back with Maya. "You're not going to explain the polymer blend?" she asked. "No." "You're sure?" "No." She laughed. "But I'm practicing." Tasha walked past carrying a clipboard. "Grace, stop hovering." "I'm standing." "You're hovering vertically." I moved. The room did not need me in the center. That realization no longer felt like rejection. It felt like success. Grandpa joined me near the door. "You did good, kiddo." "We did good." He gave me a sideways look. "Careful." I smiled. "You're right. They did good." Across the room, Marisol was still explaining her sample. No one needed me to translate her competence into something lovable. Thanksgiving came 2 weeks later. I did not go to Mom and Dad's house. That decision had once seemed unimaginable. Instead, I cooked in my townhouse. Not an impressive meal. A turkey slightly too dry. Potatoes Ben claimed were the best I had ever made, which only proved how low his standards were. Hannah brought pie. Elise brought wine. Grandpa brought rolls from the same bakery he had used for 20 years. Ben arrived carrying 2 containers and announced, "I have no idea what's in these. Someone at work said they were Thanksgiving food." Chloe came last. I had invited her only after 4 months of direct conversations and no requests for favors, equity, jobs, or messages to Mom. She stood in the doorway, holding an apple pie. "Is this weird?" she asked. "Yes." "Should I leave?" "No." She stepped inside. There was no seating chart. No one decided who belonged in the center. Halfway through dinner, Hannah took a photograph while Ben was telling a terrible story about a college roommate. I was laughing. Chloe was rolling her eyes. Grandpa had a fork halfway to his mouth. Nobody posed. Later, after everyone left, Hannah sent the picture. I stood in my kitchen looking at it. For years, family photographs had made me check where I was standing. Near the edge. Behind Chloe. Too close to Dad. Not close enough to Mom. This one had no arrangement. I was simply there. Before going to bed, I opened the digital archive Reform had completed for the apprenticeship program. The earliest laboratory notebook appeared on my screen. The cover was stained gray, at one corner. My handwriting ran across the top. Grace Holloway. Material trials. For months, I had needed those notebooks to prove something. Who had worked? Who had not? When the company began? Whose story was true? Now I looked at my own name and felt something quieter. The record had always known. The problem was that I had spent too much of my life asking other people for permission to believe it. I closed the file. On the windowsill, my first crooked bowl leaned toward the glass. The second one was straighter. Neither was useful. Neither had earned money. Neither made anyone proud enough to introduce me differently. They were mine because I had wanted to make them. That was enough. My parents had not lost a $50 million company. It had never been theirs. They had lost access to the daughter who had spent 37 years turning every demand into an obligation and every insult into another reason to prove her worth. Chloe had lost a title she had never earned. Ben had stopped carrying messages. Mom had lost the ability to keep us separated by telling each of us who the others were. And I had lost something too. The belief that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, forgave fast enough, and stayed useful long enough, my mother would eventually choose me fairly. I had thought losing that belief would leave an empty place. Instead, it made room. For work I wanted to do. For people who spoke to me directly. For evenings that did not need to produce anything. For a home where no one assigned my seat. For a life that did not begin when my family approved of it. I turned off the kitchen light. For once, there was nothing left for me to fix.